If you feel like anxiety has been holding you back, I have great news for you. There is a 96% chance that anxiety, in fact, is not what's holding you back. It's merely a symptom of what's holding you back. And then, in fact, what's really been holding you back is yourself, and there's something we can do about it. So, anxiety. Seems like anxiety is everywhere these days. 40 million Americans, that's 18% of the US adult population, actually have a diagnosed anxiety disorder. And I think we could all agree, basically 100% of us have anxiety to some degree. We have it at some point in our life. The differentiating question in medicine between a disorder and just being anxious is it persistent? Is it pervasive? Or is it specifically causal? Like you can say, oh, I've got this thing coming up and I'm nervous, or I have a term paper due, or I have to speak on stage and I'm feeling anxious, as opposed to, I feel anxious all the time and I don't really know why. But the reason I say that 96% of us actually don't need to feel, whether it's temporary or even permanent anxiety, the reason we don't need to feel like anxiety is actually this insurmountable problem is because they estimate, and I couldn't find great numbers on this, but they estimate based on the data I could find that roughly 20% of all anxiety is neurological, and 80% of it is what they would call either psychiatric or psychological, meaning it has to do with past experience, stress, trauma, essentially what we would consider external circumstances, either in the present or in the past. So only 20% is neurological. So if you say 18% of people have neurological disorder, and I have my issues with that statistic, but anyway, we'll use the numbers that we have. 40 million Americans, roughly 18% of American adults have an anxiety disorder, but only 20% of all anxiety is actually neurological in origin. So that means that roughly 3.6%, call it 4, have what we would call a persistent anxiety condition that is neurological in origin. And obviously this is not a video about how to solve that. For you should talk to a doctor. For everybody else, it means that the anxiety that you feel, whether it's temporary or persistent, is not actually neurological in origin. It's not something that's happening via some sort of deficiency or chemistry in the brain. Now, that's not to say that in psychiatry, altering neurochemistry can't impact anxiety, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it was actually chemical in origin. You can use chemistry to mask a lot of stuff, but it doesn't mean chemistry is what was causing it, right? So thanks for coming with me on all this math here. But my point is, 96% of us that are essentially feel stopped in our tracks or hesitant or insecure about doing things, like that's a pretty good number. We can be like, that's circumstantial. That's not causal. That's just a symptom, right? And we can then ask the better question, which is not, should I do this based on whether or not I feel anxious, but what is my anxiety telling me about myself and about this thing that I'm considering doing? Or if it's not temporary, if it's just persistent anxiety, then the general question is, what is anxiety telling me about myself and what I've experienced in the past and my perspective about the future? And that, to me, is really, really empowering. Who said it? FDR? The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Well, if anxiety is reasonably a substitute for fear, I would agree with that. For so many of us, anxiety, and I know this from talking to people with, what they've described as crippling anxiety. Anxiety is like a self-perpetuating thing where a lot of times so much of our anxiety is based on the decisions we've made and the compromises we've made as a result of our anxiety. And so in effect, we're having anxiety about our anxiety, or we're having anxiety about our helplessness that derives from our anxiety, or we're having anxiety about our insecurity that we, develop on the basis of not trusting ourselves because we have anxiety, right? It's like this self-fulfilling loop, this self-fulfilling prophecy. So when we start to see through it, when we start to decode it, we start to get underneath it and we realize, look, anxiety is simply the body's response to stress. That's all anxiety is. If it's not what I'm calling 4% that is persistent and neurological in origin, right? Anxiety is the body's response to stress. So if you have temporary anxiety, then you can identify the stress, right? If you have persistent anxiety, then you can start asking deeper questions about your life and say, why is it that I feel generally stressed even when I don't have an obvious source of that stress? And that's a really, really empowering question. And the reason this is such a powerful question is because when you start asking about the cause, you shift the spotlight off the anxiety and you start looking at yourself. You start looking at your life. You start looking at your choices. You start looking at your experiences and your history. And remember, in psychology and in mindset work, whatever you feed gets bigger. Whatever you focus on grows, right? Like your attention, your consciousness is a light, and things grow in the light, right? Like plants grow in the sunlight. Well, like our emotions and our feelings and our interpretations of life grow the more conscious attention we get on them. That's why they say in personal development psychology that whatever you feed gets bigger, right? So when we stop focusing, we stop being anxious about our anxiousness, and we start putting our attention on, an exploration of what could have caused it. Right out of the gate, we immediately de-emphasize, we take power away from the anxiety, and then we can begin to ask a more proactive question or look at it in a more proactive way and say, okay, maybe I can find the cause. But the reality is, a lot of what shaped us generally happened to us before we were 8 or 10 years old. And depending on what it was, we don't always have great memories around those things. And it might take some really deep work that maybe we have the time for, maybe we have the budget for, maybe we have the right contacts to go do. And, I would guess, less than half of all, psychological practitioners out there are probably really good enough to get to core issues anyway. So there's kind of this whole world, this whole journey you can embark on of saying, I got to get to the source. But regardless of that, maybe whether you know it or not, once you get into the causation conversation, then you can get into the response conversation. Because one of the things about anxiety itself is it's kind of a catch-22. Trying to deal with anxiety means focusing on anxiety, which means empowering and feeding the anxiety, which actually reduces our ability to be proactive and responsive in dealing with anxiety or anything else. So the more we're trying to actively deal directly with anxiety, the less capable we are of actually dealing with anxiety. That's the catch-22. But the more we turn our attention into causes and or manifestations, in other words, what are the other feelings that accompany, or what are the situations that tend to cause it to flare up that might be a clue as to the original cause, even if I can't remember some big trauma or some high stress experience at a time when it impacted me for life, right? But as soon as we start turning our attention towards things that are underneath the anxiety, well, because we're not activating the anxiety as much, we can be more strategic and responsive in saying, okay, well, how do I want to address it? And that leads us to like the magical question, which is, okay, what resources do I have to deal with this? And I'm going to talk more in this video later about some specific things you can do, almost like little interventions in the moment. But right now I'm talking about a bigger question of, okay, instead of focusing on how debilitated I feel or how scared I am or how helpless or hopeless or whatnot, what do I have going for me? And there's a whole school of psychology called positive psychology, which is kind of the guy at the front of the movement is named Martin Seligman out of University of Pennsylvania, and there are a number of other people that contributed to the development of positive psychology. And basically, what they did was they took psychology around kind of the mid-late 90s. That's when I guess I know the books that I've read were kind of started being written around then. It probably originated before that, but they said, look, psychology has basically turned into a pathological field, right? In other words, we're studying pathology. We're studying disease or weakness or hurt or let's call it the negative side of the human condition. We're basically studying the sick. But what if psychology wasn't just used to help, and this is Martin Seligman's terms, what if psychology could not just be used to make miserable people less miserable, but what if it could be used to help happy people be even happier, or functional people be even more functional, right? What if psychology could be used to amplify good, not just reduce bad? And it's kind of almost like a silly question now, because we all use, I think a lot of us, at least those of us that watch these types of videos on YouTube, are probably sold on the idea of using psychology, personal development, mindset development, and a better understanding of our own brains and our own, life experience and life development. We're all pretty sold on the idea of using those things to make life better. But for the vast majority of psychology and psychiatry, going all the way back to like Freud and the early Viennese, it was considered mostly a way to solve problems, heal diseases, cure systemic issues with human beings. So Seligman, what he did was he actually took this entire book called the DSM, or the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, I think is what DSM stands for. I'm not a doctor, I'm not a scientist here. I'm just a guy that loves this stuff and studies about it. The DSM, which I believe is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, which is this giant book, and I think they're on like the DSM 7 or 8 now, that catalogs every single thing that can possibly be wrong with a human being upstairs, right? And he rewrote the whole darn thing as something called the CSV, character, strengths, and virtues. And he basically said, well, what about everything that can be right with a human being, right? And then maybe if we lean into that stuff, we'll stop being so afraid of our fear and anxious about our anxiety and stressed about our stress, and we can start to be excited about our excitement and happy about our happiness and enthusiastic about our enthusiasm and making more progress because of our progress and so forth, right? And so I really, as a general statement, I'll say study positive psychology. It's been like transformational for me, but specifically applied to this, when we start digging into what's underneath the anxiety, again, in the 96% of cases where it's not persistent and it's not neurological, meaning it's not because something's literally, broken in the brain, and we start digging underneath it and then asking ourselves, what tools and resources do I have to bring to this situation? Well, now we're in the field of positive psychology going, hey, I can make my strengths stronger, I can develop them, and I can use them as the tools that I need to combat this annoying little thing that I'm disempowering because I'm not paying so much attention to it now. Instead, I'm focusing on how I'm going to respond. That's the positive psychology response to anxiety, and that's what I believe can help 96% of people. What happens if you don't deal with it? There's a saying, choose your hard, right? Like, it's hard. You know what's hard? Being married is hard. But you know what else is hard? Getting divorced is hard. Trust me, I know. I've done both. You know what's hard? Getting up early and going to the gym is hard. You know what else is hard? Not getting up early, not going to the gym, eating crappy food, getting fat, hating yourself when you look in the mirror. Trust me, I know, I've done both. You choose your hard. So all I'm saying is, ask yourself, what happens if I don't do this hard work of getting underneath my anxiety, trying to find the source, and if I can't find the source, at least identifying the triggers, and then doing a self-assessment to find my strengths and my resourcefulness, and then develop strategies to use that to deal with those situations in a way that's more proactive than just getting anxious. Yeah, that's some hard work. But isn't enduring a life where you just know that you're on this long, slow, decaying road to the ultimate regret of knowing that you sold yourself short and fell short of your potential because you wouldn't do this other hard work that you could have done at any point in your past, only now it's too late because you're at the end of your life and you're filled with regret? Talk about anxiety. If you have any kind of spiritual belief, you might have to answer for that. You might have to go look someone in the eye and say, yeah, I know you gave me the tools. I know I had it within me to deal with it, but I didn't. And now here I am and I wasted my life, right? Like that, you choose your hard. I'd rather choose the former than the latter personally. So I just want to raise the stakes here and say, come on, we got to deal with this. So the reason I'm so passionate about this anxiety stuff is because this is a really close to home subject for me. I lived a huge portion of my life just racked with anxiety. And I figured out where it came from. It came from a number of causes in my life that don't matter, right? That's just content. That's just biography for me. But some things happened to me when I was younger that left me as an adult feeling very, very scared, very, very flat-footed, very much like a passenger, even a victim, like the world was happening to me. And what I realize is, and now that I do what I do, and I teach and I coach people and I help people through this kind of thing, and I run a school that teaches people how to become entrepreneurs, and entrepreneurship as a general practice brings a ton of anxiety for the people that venture into it until they learn how to deal with it, right? So I'm constantly helping people through anxiety and developing strategies and training and stuff to deal with anxiety. And what I've identified now, and I see looking back in my life, is that anxiety, there's something we talk about in Entre, in my world, called the 3 Ps of fulfillment: physical, personal, and professional fulfillment. Sometimes we call it the 3 Ps of excellence, depending on how hard we want to push ourselves. But I'm going to suggest that there also are the 3 Ps of anxiety: physical, personal, and professional. And if you feel anxiety, my guess is that it shows up in one of these 3 areas of your life, or likely it shows up across all of them. Because since anxiety is simply our body's response to stress, which includes our mind is part of our body, right? What happens is we create this generalized response in our body that's endocrine, it's hormonal, it's chemical, it's sympathetic nervous system, right? Like we're, tense and our heart's beating and our palms are flushed, or we have obsessive looping thoughts. And so we'll just apply that to whatever area of our life shows up. And so typically the 3 Ps, physical, personal, and professional, we'll find anxiety in all 3 of those areas. We'll feel stressed about what we wear, or how we look, or the way our body looks, or our health, or that we overeat or we undereat, or, we'll apply it, or that we don't work out hard enough, or we're not doing the right diet of, that's fashionable, whatever. We'll find reasons to be anxious in our physical life, we'll find reasons to be anxious. A lot of times that anxiety shows up in like our sexual life, which is kind of a crossover into our personal life. Do people like me? I get nervous in social situations. I really like that girl, but I'm scared to ask her out. And then ultimately in our professional life, what's like the number one thing most of us obsessively worry about? It's like money, right? So the 3 P's of anxiety, and I remember getting to a point in my life where I was basically paralyzed. Physically, I knew what I wanted to do, but I wasn't doing it. Personally, I knew what I wanted to do, but I wasn't doing it, and I didn't think I even could do it. And then professionally, I hated the situation I was in my life professionally. So anxiety basically had me at my lowest low. It defined my lowest low. It was my everyday experience in my lowest low. And I remember basically having a moment where I was like, if I don't get a handle on this, this is going to define the rest of my life. And that is why this subject is so near and dear to me and why we're talking about it today. And so I'll tell you what I did to get out of it for me. And again, I'm going to give you some like short-term hacks because this is a bigger thing, right? This is like a life trajectory, strategic pivot kind of thing. And so I'll give you, again, later in the video, just like 3 quick little interventions you can do. But in general, the principle that helped me snap out of my anxiety was this principle called ikigai. And ikigai is this Japanese word that basically you could roughly translate to being like life without anxiety. It essentially means like your chosen purpose, or almost like your happy place. And ikigai is simply a convergence of 4 things. And this is a really easy analysis you can do on yourself. You basically say, hey, what do I love that I'm also good at, that the world needs, and that I could actually get paid for? Unless you're independently wealthy or you have a big trust fund or something. I mean, most of us have to actually deal with how to put food on the table, right? So if that's you, those are the 4 things that you can intersect to find what makes you happy, what you're good at, what actually does good in the world, because long-term you won't be happy. If you study the needs of personality based on like Adler, Tony Robbins, and others, you find you won't be happy unless you're making a contribution to the world long-term. So what makes me happy? What am I good at? What does the world actually need? And what can I get paid for? And when I decided I am only going to live a life congruent with that, is basically since then I've had literally almost no anxiety. I mean, I'll have like a little bit of nerves when there's something really big coming up. Like yesterday I was doing an interview with somebody, and on a week's notice, he invited me to come speak at what'll probably be the biggest speaking event of my life. And he was like, yeah, just hop on a plane and show up and I'll have you on stage. And like, I think I had like a little flutter, but like, that's it. Like no more anxiety, because everything is so in alignment with purpose now. I know I'm doing what I love. I know I'm good at what I do, and I'm getting better at it all the time because I love it and I'm willing to do the hard work. I know it makes me happy. I know the world needs entrepreneurial education and empowerment to try to deconstruct this massive delusion that so many people operate under around, what you're told when you're young and how you grow up, and why everybody's doing what they were supposed to do, but less than 14% of people are actually happy. Like, I know the world needs this work. And then finally it pays well, right? So like, why wouldn't I be happy? Why would I ever have anxiety? But I had to make a very conscious decision, and it was a potentially very anxiety producing decision if I had given the anxiety the power to make this total shift in my life and focus on something that only checked those 4 boxes. So that is my general strategy for dealing with it. That's some experience of mine on how powerful it can be to deal with it, and hopefully some background context that empowers you to look beneath this anxiety that you might have felt for so much of your life, and know and at least feel empowered, like, hey, this is a tackleable situation. Like Marie Forleo has a book that says everything is figure outable. I really, really, truly believe that. I even think the 4% that's neurological and persistent is figure outable. You just might need to do that difficult thing for a lot of us of just asking for a little help. But generally, I believe that all of this is figure outable. And that's kind of my frame for all that. But now I did promise you 3 interventions, 3 little quick hacks you can do. So when you find yourself in the moment and you realize, okay, this has gotten away from me, at least I'm going to try to bring myself back to center, to present. And we'll talk about presence here in a moment. But the first thing is, find yourself something you can control. There's one thing to know about stress. Stress, and the counterpart of stress is trauma. There's macro trauma, there's micro trauma, there's big awful things, and there's little annoying things. But stress and trauma are always related to a feeling of a loss of control because it derives in our subconscious, and our subconscious exists for one purpose, which is to keep us alive by controlling all the elements around us and controlling all the variables. And when we feel like we can't control things, our subconscious says, hey, we don't have the power right now to keep you alive. There could be risk. So that's stress, right? And then the body responds with anxiety. So if you're feeling anxiety, it means by definition, you're experiencing a subconscious and conscious response to a perceived loss of control. How do you compensate for that? Immediately. Find something you can control. Literally, it could be as simple as like right now, if I was feeling stressed, I would go, what can I control? You know what? It's kind of hot in here. I'm going to go turn the AC on. Now, I guess I'm not at liberty to do that right now because you would hear the AC and it would interfere with the video. But in general, I'm surrounded by things that I could go get control of right now, right? So I tore the tag out of my shirt before I shot this video because it was irritating my neck, and I put it on the table right there. And I could go get it and throw it away. That would be creating a sense of control in my environment. You can do little tiny things to create a sense of control, and you'll notice that anxiety reduces. Hey, sorry for the interruption. I just wanted to let you know you can get a free copy of my book, The Millionaire Shortcut, which will show you the fastest way to become a millionaire in the new economy. And there's a special link just for this episode in the description. So thanks for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the episode. The next thing you can do is you can try to, if you can identify the thing that you are feeling anxious about, if the source is obvious, you can identify it and state how you're feeling about it. So and then what you're gonna do is you're gonna state it, and then you're gonna restate it after you do a little sanitation work on the statement. Let me demonstrate. So let's say that I was feeling anxiety about the fact that I'm going to speak at this event next week. And I say, Jeff, why are you feeling anxiety about that? Well, I came up last minute. I'm really unprepared. I wasn't ready. I didn't know. I have to rearrange some plans with my family. They might be upset, and I just didn't feel ready to do this. Okay, so that's totally reasonable reason to feel anxiety, right? But then I can stop and go, okay, well, let me really filter that. Let me process that through logic and try to remove what are called cognitive distortions. Or I guess since we're talking Seligman, let's refer to what Seligman calls the 3 Ps of pessimism, right? Which are pervasiveness, permanence, and personalization. That's pervasiveness is an error of size, permanence is an error of time, personalization is an error of blame, right? So in other words, I'm making the problem bigger, I'm making it more permanent or more eternal, and I'm making it my fault. Those would be the 3 cognitive errors that would cause me to be pessimistic about a situation. So I could look at that same situation and say, okay, how could I clean this up, remove the pessimism, remove the cognitive distortions? And by the way, if you Google cognitive distortions, you'll find these wonderful lists of all the ways that we can apply our negative filters to the world and see things in a way that makes us feel bad, right? And we can start removing all these things from the language. And in this case, and there's longer exercises on how to do this, but I'll just give you an example. I would restate the sentence to go, I am so fired up that I was invited to come to this on short notice because I made such an impression on someone that they were moved to want me to participate in what they're doing and felt that I had all this value to offer, which, by the way, they're a pretty astute, esteemed person. They're probably a good judge of character. And if they see that value in me, there's probably something to it. I should feel good about that. And I know I'm ready because I've been preparing for this for years. In other words, I don't need to get ready. The Navy SEALs tell me all the time that by the time you need to get ready, it's too late to get ready. And if you just found out you need to get ready, don't bother trying to get ready. You're either ready or you're not. Prepare now for the worst battle you'll ever find yourself in. And I've been taking that advice for years. I don't need to worry. I know that I'm ready. And by the way, I've been trusting the process this far, and I've gotten this far, and I think that every person watching this video can probably stop and assess your life and look at your situation and say, hey, I live a better life than probably 99% of all humans that have ever existed on this planet. Because the simple fact that you're sitting in a room at an internet connection watching YouTube or on a mobile device means you live in a time where our problems are not getting eaten by saber-toothed tigers or getting, booted out of the cave by the Klan to die die exposed to the elements. We don't have real problems anymore. That's not to downplay it, but that's the thing about all this anxiety. But anyway, so you can look at your life and find all these reasons to turn the statement into all these wonderful things, or at least to remove some of the negative and move it back to an objective neutral. Scott Peck in the opening chapter of The Road Less Traveled, he said, Sanity is a dedication to seeing things as they are regardless of the cost. And sometimes seeing things as they are will cost us our negativity. It will cost us our cynicism. It will cost us our self-doubt. So just be as sane as possible and try to sanitize the negative observation that's causing you to feel the anxiety about the situation. And then the final hack is what's called the 3-3-3 rule. And this is just like the ultimate, bring it back to center, bring it back to the moment hack. And it's really simple. Just stop. Identify 3 things you can see. I see a light. I see a camera. I see a microphone. Identify 3 things you can hear. I hear a clock. I hear an air compressor, I think in the space next door. I hear quiet. It's actually really quiet in here. It's a studio. We're shooting videos. Regardless. And then move 3 parts of your body. Finger, neck, foot. Move 3 parts of your body. Like, actually, I just did it, and it's incredible how centered and still and in the present I am. Because the thing you have to understand about anxiety and anything related to fear, it's about beliefs about the past applied through worry or projection to the future. Fear exists in a tension between past and future. In fact, I'm going to challenge you. You cannot be scared of something that has actually happened. Think about that. It is impossible to be scared of something that is happening already in the present. I guess you could be scared about something that happened in the past happening again in the future. But in terms of something that is actually happening, you cannot feel fear. You could feel pain. You could feel mostly like a desire to flee. Like if a bear is biting your arm, you're not actually scared of the bear biting your arm because it's already biting your arm. Your arm might hurt. But any fear you're feeling is about what's going to happen in the aftermath. You're afraid you might bleed out on the ground and never see your family again. And then let's say the bear runs away and you're bleeding out. Now you're afraid that you might actually die. You can't actually be scared of something that's happening in the present. Fear and present cannot coexist. So think about that. And that's why the idea is just get super present. 3 things you see, 3 things you hear, move 3 parts of your body, boom, you're in the present, at least for a moment until your habits get you back to thinking about past and future. You will get a brief reprieve from anxiety and you can start to train that like a muscle. Hey, if you liked this video, then you're gonna love this video. Anxiety is a worldwide epidemic. It's affecting people, all types of people, every day. People just like you or me. But with some good daily habitual techniques that I will share with you in a moment, it can be easily managed.